Okay, we are going through the last week in the life and the ministry of Jesus on earth, also known as Holy Week. Now, the Bible doesn't call it Holy Week, just something somehow believers and followers of Jesus have called it for who knows how long. Well, when does this Holy Week start and when does it end? Well, it starts on Sunday and it ends on Sunday. And it's the events that are recorded for us in the Gospels of that week. Now, the Gospels are kind of interesting in that the last 25% to a third of the Gospels talk about that week. So you're reading through the Gospels and you get to a certain point, and then the last 25% of the book is all about this last week that we're calling Holy Week. And we're going through the events of it to see what happens there and leading up to the cross, the things that happened leading up to the cross, the death of Jesus, and we'll end with the resurrection on Sunday. So we're picking up in Mark chapter 11, and there's an awful lot of stuff here going on. So we'll just have to see how far we can get here, but there's a lot going on. So we're going to pick up in Mark chapter 11, verse 27. So if you're following along in a Bible, you'll notice that in verse 27 it says, they arrived again in Jerusalem, and while Jesus was walking in the temple courts, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders came to him. So what's happening here is during this last week, there's thousands of pilgrims, tens of thousands of pilgrims that come to Jerusalem for the Passover. The Passover, again, going all the way back to the book of Exodus, when it's depicting they came out of Egypt, they came out of slavery by the blood of the lamb. The innocent lamb was slain, and when the innocent lamb was slain, they came out and were delivered. So these people, the Jewish people, the Hebrews, the Israelites, they are under bondage again, and this time with Rome. And they're desiring to be set free from Rome, and they're looking for the Messiah to come and to do that. They're looking for the King of Israel to come and to do that for them, to release them, just like happened before in Egypt. So Jesus is gaining notoriety, and they think he might be that king. You can imagine he raises the dead, he gives sight to the blind, he makes deaf ears hear. And so right here in verse 27, it says they arrived again. So they're staying outside of the city because there's so many people, there's so many pilgrims. So there's no room for that big group of people that Jesus is traveling with in the city. So what they're doing this week is they're coming into the city every day, and at night or at the end of the day, they're leaving and going back. They're coming up and down a hill. So when they come into the city from where they're coming, Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, they go down the hill, they get into the Kidron Valley, and then they go up into Jerusalem. At night, when they come back, they come out of the city, they go down into the Kidron Valley, and then they come up to the Mount of Olives. A lot of things happening. So what's going to happen here a lot in chapter 11 and on Tuesday, because this is Tuesday, what happens on Tuesday, is that he's going to end up with a lot of questions. He's going to end up doing a lot of teaching, a lot of interaction with the religious leaders, a lot of confrontation with the religious leaders. And so they asked him, who gave you authority? And Jesus said, well, I'll just ask you one question. Tell me, by what authority am I doing these things? He said, John's baptism, was that from heaven or was that of human origin? Tell me. And they discussed it among themselves, and they said, if we say from heaven, he'll ask, then why didn't you believe him? And if we say of human origin, they feared the people because the people thought John was a prophet. So they answered Jesus, well, he said, well, we don't know. He said, well, then neither am I going to tell you by what authority I'm doing these things. They're just looking for a fight. They're not really looking to know the answers to these questions. Now, in chapter 12 here, Jesus gives this story of, we'll read it. 12, verse 1, a man planted a vineyard and he put a wall around it and he dug a pit for it put a wine press in there, and he built a watchtower. And then he rented it out to some farmers, and he moved to another place. And at harvest time, he sent his servant to go collect the fruit, and they seized him and sent him away. They didn't want to do it. He sent another servant. They struck him, and they treated him with shame. He sent another one, and they killed him. And he sent many others, and one of them, and the one that they killed. And he sent others, and some of them they beat, and others they killed. He only had one left to send. So he sent his son, whom he loved, it's Jesus, John 3:16. And he sent the last one, was saying, they'll respect my son. But the tenants said to one another, this is the heir, let's kill him, the inheritance will be ours. So they took him, and they killed him, and they threw him out of the vineyard. And Jesus said, what will the owner of the vineyard do? He'll come in to kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. Haven't you read, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this, and it's marvelous in our eyes. And it says that the chief priests and the teachers of the law, elders looked for a way to arrest him because they knew that the parable was spoken about them. Big, high-level confrontation between Jesus and these guys. And so the account there is that God had given all of this, the prophets, the Old Testament, the deliverance, the Passover, to the Jewish people, and now the Messiah has come, and they're going to reject him. And they know that Jesus is talking about them. Then they ask, should we pay taxes? And Jesus said, well, whose picture is on the money? And they said, Caesar. He said, well, if Caesar's picture's on it, must belong to him. Give it to him. And they're like, man, we just can't trap this guy. And so they do some other things. They try to trap him with what's the greatest commandment. And Jesus said, well, he said, it's sort of simple. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, and mind. And the second one's just like that. Love your neighbor as yourself. And they're like, man, we just can't get this guy. So they keep asking him questions. They keep trying to trap him. They can't trap him. They can't get him anywhere. This is also where Jesus is watching, where they put the money in the box. And this widow comes. Jesus sat opposite the place where the offerings are put, and he's watching the people put the money in. Well, today he's watching who's putting money in the box too. We think the box is sort of private. Nobody notices whether you put money in or not. No, I don't. I've made it a policy to. I really don't want to know that. But Jesus does. He's watching it. And many people threw in large amounts, but poor widow put in her 2 copper coins worth a few cents. And Jesus said to his disciples, he said, you know what? He said, that lady, she put more into the treasury than all of the others, because they gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put everything she had to live on. And now we're talking about that lady today. We're not talking about the rich people who gave a little tiny bit, gave a lot, big numbers, but didn't really hurt them. So then you have chapter 13. This is sort of interesting. Chapter 13 is where Jesus goes into this discourse about what's happening in the end of time. And he brings it all the way out to the end. A prophecy about his return, prophecy about the end of the world, prophecy about, again, him coming back. And so we don't have the time to look in all of that, but you can read it in chapter 13 of Mark. You can also read it in Matthew chapter 24. This also, we get into chapter 14, where it says, now the Passover and the festival of the unleavened bread were only 2 days away. So watch the calendar here. It's Tuesday, and 2 days away is when the Passover begins. That's going to be on Thursday. Passover begins on Thursday. Jesus is crucified on the Passover. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, because a lot of people think he was crucified on a Friday because of the way that the church has done the calendar and done Holy Week. But how do you get 3 days and 3 nights out of Friday? So we'll come to that. It's kind of interesting. It's something that you want to explore, and it makes great conversation with people. Great witnessing tools, just talk about these controversies. People like to talk about them. And so the Passover, the festival of unleavened bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law, they were scheming to arrest him and secretly kill him. But they said not during the festival. They didn't want to do it on the Passover. Why didn't they want to do it on the Passover? Well, because it would make a big deal on the Passover. So they didn't want to do it on the Passover. But Jesus is going to fulfill all of the prophecies, and he is going to be crucified on the Passover. Why? Because he is the Passover. We'll talk a little bit more about the Passover next time. but he is the Passover. He is the Passover. He will be crucified on the Passover, even though they don't want to do it. So let's move along, and we will get into what happens on Wednesday, and then we'll move into Thursday of Holy Week. Hey, bless you guys. Let's keep moving along in our journey through Holy Week, the last week of the life and the ministry of Jesus. Hey, bless you.